Originally, I wanted to look at the Zapruder film to test out some computer programs to remove the blur from images. And I thought I might find something in the film. The people that were helping me provided me with scientific arguments, knowing I was a physicist, that to show that these arguments for alteration were incorrect. And sure enough, I tested them and applied the physics, and it turned out that these arguments were incorrect. But when I was doing that, other effects popped out, things that hadn't been claimed before, and I realised for the first time that the film was inconsistent, that it couldn't possibly obey the laws of physics. Now, most of the film is perfectly correct. Most of the physics is right. 99% of the time when you examine the Zapruder film, the technical aspects of the film are correct. You can apply all the physics you like and it works out perfectly. And so when you find one or two examples that just stand out as being completely incorrect, that really throws you, because you understand what's going on with the film, and suddenly here's something which is impossible that hits you in the face. For a couple of days after I realised to myself that this was really happening, that the Zapruder film had been altered, in fact fabricated, was created. It was a fraud, it was a hoax, and for a couple of days I was just shaken. You know, as a physicist, you just assume that the things you're given are genuine. If someone does an experiment for you, they give you real data. They usually don't make it up. You analyse things and you work things out. And to find that what everybody has been assuming to be the real data, the genuine article, is a fake. And I'd been doing deblurring of the frames, and now and again you come across things that didn't seem to quite work out correctly, and you just assume it. As a scientist, the natural assumption is not that there's something wrong with it, it's that there's something wrong with you, that you don't understand something about the film. And within the errors, you try and find an explanation for any anomaly. You assume that if there's a problem, that the problem is with yourself. That's the way a scientist works. And you don't look for mistakes. You don't look for the thing to be fake. You look to try and expand your own understanding of how the film works. When I did an early video clip where I deblurred Jean Hill and Mary Moorman standing on the grass, because that was a big controversy at the time, whether Mary Moorman stepped into the street or not. And I decided I'd put together a video clip showing them stationary in the film, not moving around, and removing as much of the blur as possible. And I found that Jean Hill was standing there with her hands clasped like this. And by that stage I was already aware of her testimony where she yelled out, you know, "Hey, Mr. President, you know, take a photograph, look this way so we can take your photograph." And to see her stationary and her head just snapping like that as the only animation, I started getting uneasy, feeling that this looked like an animation when I was starting to investigate whether the film could be a fake. I still wasn't sure. That wasn't enough evidence. The fact that someone stands there stock still doesn't prove to a scientist that the film's a fake. People can do that. But when I analysed the Stemmons freeway sign that David Mantic had found increased in width into the sprocket hole area, and I'd been told that the argument was the pincushion distortion of the camera lens. And sure enough, when I checked it out, mathematically, the sign got wider because of the pincushion distortion. But when I found that the sides of the sign, it was the only object in the film that I had ever seen that didn't obey the distortion of the lens. It was put in over the top. And to me, that was the clincher. That was the smoking gun. The film had been altered, at the very least. That didn't tell me at the time that the film had been completely fabricated. And that took other pieces of evidence. The science that I used in analysing the film, the physics that I used, the principles of physics, are not recent inventions of physics. This physics has been around for hundreds of years. The optical equations and the principles of optics go back to Newton's time, as do the basic laws of motion. So we're talking 350 years of physics in terms of understanding how things should move and how the optics should work. So someone in 1964 could have done the same calculations to know where things should be. Someone in 1864 should have been able to do exactly the same calculations as to where objects should be in the film. If I had to sit down and put together a film in 1964, as long as there was someone operating the equipment to do the photographic cutting and pasting, the calculations were easy. You could have done them with a pencil and paper. I could do them for you today with a pencil and paper. Someone in 1964, many people, much more experienced than me, involved in photogrammetry or mensuration, which is the measurement and analysis of photographs. It was a well-known field. It's almost like Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty. The scientists that put together the film did an excellent job. It's a magnificent piece of work. And 99% of the time, all the properties, all the optical properties and the motion and even the jiggling of the camera are beautifully done. But once you hit that piece of evidence that tells you this film violates the laws of physics, this film didn't come through the Zapruder camera, then it's almost like a game of people that lived 40 years ago. It's almost your wits against theirs. Can you find the next piece of the puzzle of where they made the mistakes? And that's why you really look back at the life issues that were published the most rapidly, the life issues that were published in the first days and the first weeks, because under the pressure of time and uncertainty and the full scenario of the assassination had not yet been worked out, that's where the mistakes would happen. Not for all the frames in between that were created at leisure to make a smooth transition between what you showed in those early days. The places where the mistakes were made were those key frames that were published, and most of the time they left their bases open, but in one or two cases they made a terrible mistake. And once you latch onto that, it's really a game of Sherlock Holmes to find the next step. There was no pressure on me from my employer to stop working on it as a school teacher. In fact, they were quite enthused about it and wanted to know more, because everybody in Australia continues to be affected by the assassination. They see the events in the world and they want to know how the balance of power was changed. Most Australians didn't believe that we're alive at the time. Tell me they did not believe the official story from the start. They didn't know what happened, and they don't get as much information as you do in the United States. We don't study it in history at school, except in isolated cases. A colleague of mine does run a history unit on the JFK assassination and is hugely popular. And any time I sit in front of my students and I start talking about the assassination, they're absolutely dead quiet. They have 1,000 questions. They want to know everything about the Cuba and Vietnam War and all of the people involved, and I could speak all day and they'll listen, and they're not falling asleep. They're vitally interested in modern history and how this affects the world as we've grown up in it, because I wasn't alive at the time of the assassination. That change in America changed the whole world. And where I sit today as an underemployed physicist in some way may be traced back to what happened in 1963. It changed the world.